The room fell silent as the will was read. Not the respectful silence of grief, but the held breath silence of people waiting for a punchline. When it came, it arrived exactly as expected. A few quiet laughs rippled through the small gathering. Someone in the back row whispered just loud enough to be heard. Someone else shook their head with a smile that did not quite hide the pity beneath it. Marcus Thorne sat near the end of the long table, hands folded in his lap posture, straight without effort. He did not react to the laughter. He had learned long ago that reactions were invitations, and he had nothing to invite. At his feet, Echo lay in a perfect down position, her body angled toward the door ears, rotating at each new sound. She had not moved since they entered the room 20 minutes earlier, but her amber eyes tracked every shift, every breath, every tension that passed through the air like weather. Marcus was 40, old enough to have learned that most promises were conditional, young enough to still carry the weight of every one he'd broken. The past 6 years had taught him that survival and living were not the same thing. The attorney, a man in his late 60s with thinning gray hair and a mustache that looked like it had survived longer than his patients, cleared his throat and continued. To my grandson, Marcus Thorne, he read, voice careful and measured. I leave full ownership of the Thorne house and all surrounding land. The laughter stopped being polite. It became open, genuine. A woman across the table, a cousin Marcus had met twice in his life, leaned back in her chair and pressed her lips together in something that looked like sympathy, but felt like relief. A man near the window, another distant relative whose name Marcus could not remember, shook his head slowly, as if watching someone step into a trap they had been warned about. That house. The words were not spoken aloud, but Marcus heard them anyway. They hung in the air like smoke, thick and familiar. That house on the hill. That place no one wanted. That inheritance no one envied. Outside, parked in the small lot behind the law office, Echo sat alone in the truck. She had been there for the entire meeting, waiting with the kind of patience that came from training and trust. The passenger seat beside her held a single framed photograph carefully placed facing forward. Eleanor Thorne at 60, standing on the porch of the house, arms crossed, face calm. Echo had refused to enter the vehicle until Marcus placed the photograph there. Only then had she jumped in, settling beside it, as if the image required guarding. Now as the meeting dragged on inside, Echo's body went rigid. Her ears snapped forward. Her gaze locked on something beyond the parking lot, beyond the trees, beyond the ridge that separated the town from the hill. She did not bark. She did not whine. She simply sat perfectly still, staring at something no one else could see. Inside, Marcus stood when the meeting ended. People offered condolences in tones that carried no weight. A few hands were extended. Marcus shook them briefly, his grip firm but not lingering. No one asked what he planned to do with the house. No one expected him to keep it. The assumption was clear. He would sell. He would leave. He would do what any reasonable person would do when handed a burden disguised as a gift. Marcus said nothing to correct them. He stepped out into the cold Montana air, and the wind hit him immediately. November in Briar Glen carried a sharpness that went straight through fabric and settled in the bones. The sky was pale, stretched thin over the valley like old canvas. Snow dusted the edges of the sidewalk, not enough to bury anything, just enough to outline what was already there. Echo was watching him through the truck window when he approached. Her tail moved once, a single controlled wag, then stilled. Marcus opened the door, and she shifted, making space, her eyes never leaving his face. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly, climbing in. "I know." He did not start the engine right away. He sat with his hands on the wheel, looking out at the town that had not changed in any meaningful way since he was a child. The diner still leaned slightly toward the road, as if eavesdropping. The hardware store windows still displayed tools that looked like they had been there since the 70s. The post office flag snapped in the wind, the only thing moving with any urgency. People walked the sidewalks with the slow, careful steps of those who believed time would wait for them. A few glanced toward the truck. One older woman wrapped in a thick wool coat crossed the street rather than pass too close. Marcus watched her go, his expression unchanged. Echo shifted beside him, her body turning toward the window. Her ears lifted. Her breathing slowed. Marcus followed her gaze. The hill rose in the distance, dark against the pale sky. Even from here, the shape of the house was faintly visible. Stone walls that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Tall windows that stared outward like eyes that had seen too much and learned to keep quiet. Marcus exhaled slowly. He reached over and rested a hand on Echo's shoulder. Her muscles were tense beneath his palm, coiled and waiting. "Not yet," he murmured. But even as he said it, he felt the pull. Not fear, not dread. Something quieter. Something that felt like recognition without memory. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. Echo settled back into her seat, but her gaze remained fixed on the hill. They drove through town slowly. Marcus noted details without conscious effort. The positions of parked cars, the locations of exits, the sight lines from each intersection. It was automatic, a reflex built over years of training that had never fully left him. His right knee ached with the cold, a dull, persistent throb that worsened when he pressed the brake. He shifted his weight, slightly compensating without thinking. At the edge of town, where the pavement began to crack and the buildings thinned, Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a small motel. The Pines Motor Lodge. 2 stories, 12 rooms. A neon sign that buzzed faintly, even in daylight. He checked in with minimal conversation. The clerk, a young man in his 20s with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Jordan, handed over a key attached to a wooden fob and gestured toward the stairs. "2nd floor, end of the hall. Quiet up there." Marcus nodded his thanks. The room smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner. A double bed with a faded quilt. A nightstand with a lamp that flickered when he turned it on. A bathroom with tiles that had been white once. Marcus set his duffel bag on the chair and stood at the window looking out over the parking lot toward the distant ridge. Echo moved through the room, methodically, nose to the ground, checking corners and shadows. When she finished, she returned to Marcus and sat at his feet, leaning her weight against his leg. Marcus reached down and scratched behind her ears, fingers finding the familiar grooves and ridges. "Good girl," he said quietly. She leaned harder into him, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the heater and the rhythm of their breathing. Marcus had not planned to stay long in Briar Glen. The will reading had been a formality, something to be endured, and then left behind. But now, standing in this small room, with the weight of Echo against his leg, and the shape of the house visible in the distance, he realized something had shifted. He could not name it yet. But it was there. That night, Marcus did not sleep well. The bed was unfamiliar, the sounds of the motel too loud and too quiet in turns. He woke twice to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, his hand moving instinctively toward the side of the bed where his sidearm used to rest before he remembered where he was. Each time, Echo lifted her head from where she lay on the floor beside him, watching until he settled again. By morning, the sky had lightened to a pale gray that promised nothing. Marcus rose before the alarm he had not set, dressed in the same worn jeans and thermal shirt he had traveled in, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. Echo followed him down the stairs and across the parking lot. They walked without destination, moving through the quiet streets as the town began to wake. Lights flickered on in windows. A truck rumbled past, heading toward the lumber yard. Smoke rose from a chimney 2 blocks over. Marcus kept his pace steady, despite the ache in his knee. Echo stayed close, her body aligned with his left leg, her movements synchronized with his, without need for instruction. They reached the town square just as the first businesses began to open. The diner's lights came on in sequence, revealing a long counter and a handful of booths. Inside, an older man in his 70s wiped down tables with slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up as Marcus and Echo passed the window. His gaze lingered for a moment, then returned to his work. Across the street, the post office door swung open. A woman stepped out, tall and spare, wrapped in a dark coat that made her look even thinner than she was. Her hair was iron gray, pulled back into a severe knot that exposed a long, narrow face. When she saw Marcus, she stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she spoke. "Morning." Her voice was clipped, but not unfriendly. "Morning," Marcus replied. Her eyes dropped to Echo. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, recognizing. "That dog's working," she said. It was not a question. "She's trained," Marcus confirmed. The woman nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. She did not introduce herself. Marcus did not ask. In small towns, names were offered only when people decided you belonged. She walked past him without another word, her steps careful on the uneven sidewalk. Marcus continued toward the edge of the square. Echo's pace slowed. Her nose dipped toward the ground, tracing invisible lines only she could read. Marcus let the leash go slack, giving her room to work. They stopped at the corner where the road began to climb. The hill rose ahead of them, dark and silent. From here, the house was more distinct. Stone walls, steep roof, windows that caught no reflection. Echo turned back toward Marcus, her amber eyes intent. She did not pull. She waited. Marcus crouched, resting a hand against her chest. He could feel the steady rhythm of her breath beneath his palm, the controlled energy that hummed just beneath the surface. "Not yet," he said again, quieter this time. But even as he spoke, he felt it. The pull, the weight, the thing that had been waiting for years, patient and unmoving like the house itself. They turned back toward town. By mid-morning, Marcus found himself standing outside the Briar Glen hardware store. The building was narrow and deep, wedged between a closed florist and a dentist's office, with a hand-painted sign advertising painless extractions. The front window displayed an assortment of tools, some new, most not arranged without any clear system. A bell rang sharply when Marcus pushed open the door. The smell hit him immediately. Oil, wood, metal, dust. The kind of scent that spoke of decades of use and careful maintenance. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, thick forearms marked with old scars. His beard was short and gray-flecked, trimmed with care, but worn thin at the edges as if he had once kept it longer and cut it back out of habit. His eyes were a clear pale blue, sharp and observant. He looked up when Marcus entered. His gaze moved from Marcus to Echo and back again. He set down the ledger he had been writing in. "Didn't think you'd come in here," the man said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel rolled smooth by years of weather. Marcus met his gaze. "Morning." The corner of the man's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. He looked down at Echo, who stood calmly at Marcus's side posture, neutral but attentive. "That dog's got sense," he said. "Knows when to stay quiet." "She's learned," Marcus replied. The man nodded slowly. He leaned his weight against the counter, crossing his arms. "Word travels fast around here," he said after a moment. "You know that." "I figured," Marcus said. "The house," the man continued, his voice dropping lower. "People are talking." Marcus waited. The man glanced toward the front window, then back. "They're not worried you'll move in. They're worried you'll ask questions." The words landed with precision. Marcus felt the truth of them settle, heavy and exact. "And you?" Marcus asked. The man hesitated, just long enough to be noticeable. "I'm worried you'll listen," he said finally. He straightened as if realizing he had said more than intended. "You need anything," he added, gesturing toward the aisles behind him. "Supplies, tools." "Not today," Marcus said, "but I will." The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then come back when you're ready." As Marcus turned to leave, Echo paused. Her head turned toward the back of the store, her ears lifting, her body stiffening just slightly. The man noticed. "Basement's empty," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Just old stock." Marcus did not respond. He simply rested a hand against Echo's harness, steadying her, and guided her out. The door closed behind them with a faint jingle of the bell. They walked the perimeter of the town as the day wore on. Marcus observed without inserting himself. A group of men repairing a fence fell silent as he passed. A young mother pulled her child closer, not in fear but caution. No one met his eyes for long. Echo remained alert, her movements precise. She checked shadows, paused at intersections, scanned doorways. Once she stopped abruptly, staring at nothing Marcus could see. That was when it happened. Echo sat, not on command, not in response to any pressure on the leash. She sat squarely, her body aligned toward the hill beyond the trees, her ears fully upright, her posture unnaturally still. Marcus followed her gaze. For an instant, the air felt weighted, as if the space between him and the distant house had tightened, as if an invisible line had been drawn that he could not step across, yet could not ignore. Echo's chest rose and fell once, slowly, deliberately. Then she stood, turned back to Marcus, and pressed her head firmly against his thigh. Not a warning, not fear. Confirmation. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself in the cold air, the rough fabric of his jeans beneath his fingers, the solid presence of the dog beside him. Whatever lay ahead was not calling to frighten him. It was calling to be acknowledged. The afternoon passed without incident. Marcus returned to the motel as the light began to fade, the sky deepening into muted purples and grays. He fed Echo, checked her paws for ice, brushed a thin layer of snow from her coat. She ate calmly, then lay near the door, facing outward. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed boots, still on elbows resting on his knees. The events of the day replayed in fragments. The man at the hardware store, his hesitation, the way the town shifted around Marcus without ever fully engaging. They were not afraid of the house, he realized. They were afraid of what the house remembered. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the folded summary of the will. He did not read it again. He did not need to. The house was his, not because no one else wanted it, but because no one else would face it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of colder days to come. Echo lifted her head ears, angling toward the sound, then relaxed again. Marcus exhaled slowly. Tomorrow he would stop avoiding the hill, but tonight he would listen. Marcus did not wait for the sun to climb very high before leaving the motel. The morning carried a brittle clarity, the kind that sharpened edges and made distances feel honest. Snow had fallen lightly in the night, not enough to bury anything, just enough to outline what was already there. The hill stood beyond the town, like a held breath. Echo walked close at his side, the black harness snug against her chest, red trim catching the cold light when she moved. Her pace was measured, alert, without urgency. Marcus kept the leash loose, letting her set the rhythm. This was not a patrol. This was approach. The road narrowed as it climbed pavement, giving way to packed dirt and gravel. Trees pressed in on either side, tall and quiet, their branches knitted together overhead. Marcus felt the temperature drop as they ascended, a subtle shift that carried the scent of stone and old wood. He stopped once halfway up to look back. Briar Glen lay below, compact and distant. From here it looked harmless. From here it looked like a place that forgot easily. The Thorne house came into full view as the trees thinned. It was larger than Marcus remembered, not in height, but in presence. Built of dark stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it, the house rose from the ground as if it had been placed there deliberately, not to dominate the landscape, but to endure it. Tall windows stared outward, clouded with age but intact. The roofline was steep, designed for heavy snow, its angles precise and practical. Nothing about it suggested collapse. Nothing about it suggested neglect. The iron gate at the end of the drive hung slightly ajar. Its hinges were rusted but functional, the metal bearing the marks of weather rather than violence. Marcus paused at the threshold, hand resting briefly against the cold iron. Echo stepped forward first, her nose lowered, tracing the ground, then lifted as she crossed the gate. She did not hesitate. She did not bristle. Her tail moved once, slow and steady. Marcus followed. The crunch of gravel beneath his boots sounded louder than it should have, the noise echoing up the stone facade before settling back into silence. He noted the details automatically. The lack of broken glass. The evenness of the steps. The way fallen leaves gathered at the edges but did not choke the entrance. This place had been left alone, not abandoned. He reached the front door and tested the handle. Unlocked. The door opened inward with a low, controlled creak, the sound of wood that had been used and maintained, not left to rot. Cool air spilled out to meet them, carrying the faint scent of dust stone and something softer beneath it. Lavender, maybe. Or soap, long since absorbed into the grain of the floors. Marcus stepped inside. The foyer was wide, the ceiling high. Light filtered through tall windows, illuminating a patterned rug laid straight and unfaded. A coat rack stood near the wall, empty but polished. The space felt arranged. Echo moved ahead, her nails clicking lightly against stone. She paused at the center of the room, ears pivoting as if taking inventory. Her body language was relaxed but attentive, the posture of a working dog entering a new environment with permission. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had expected cold. He had expected the oppressive stillness people described when they spoke of the house in lowered voices. What he felt instead was restraint. Furniture occupied the rooms beyond the foyer. Chairs aligned, tables dusted, shelves holding books that had been sorted rather than abandoned. The house did not feel empty. It felt paused. Marcus moved room to room, methodical, his gaze sweeping corners and thresholds out of habit. He checked doors, noted sightlines, counted windows. Nothing startled him. Nothing resisted his presence. In the main sitting room, sunlight fell across a small table positioned near the largest window. On it lay a single envelope. Marcus stopped. The envelope was cream-colored, its edges clean. His name was written across the front in neat, deliberate handwriting. Marcus Thorne. His chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. He approached slowly, every sense tuned. Echo sat a few feet away, watching him, head tilted slightly, eyes bright. She did not growl. She did not retreat. The envelope had been placed to be found. Marcus picked it up. The paper was cool beneath his fingers. He turned it once, then broke the seal. The letter inside was brief. Marcus, if you are reading this here, then you have already done the hardest part. Come in. Before you listen to anyone else, walk the house. Look closely. This place was never meant to frighten. It was meant to hold. Grandmother. There was no date, no flourish. Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. The motion was precise, respectful. He felt something shift inside him. Not revelation, but alignment. He continued through the house with new eyes. The kitchen was clean if unused. Cabinets were stocked with basic supplies, labels handwritten and orderly. The dining hall held a long table, chairs pushed in evenly as if awaiting instruction rather than company. Upstairs, bedrooms stood ready, beds made, curtains drawn just enough to allow light without exposure. At the end of a narrow hallway on the second floor, Marcus found a door that differed from the others. The wood was darker, the handle worn smooth by use. He tested it, locked. He did not force it. Instead, he waited. Echo approached the door and sat posture straight, gaze fixed. Her ears twitched once, then settled. Marcus scanned the hall. A small writing desk stood against the wall nearby, its surface bare, except for a folded cloth. He opened the top drawer. Inside, wrapped carefully, was a key. The door opened with a soft click. Inside was a study. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with ledgers, journals, and labeled boxes. A desk sat beneath the window, its surface clear except for an open book. Sunlight illuminated the pages, revealing rows of neat handwriting. Marcus stepped closer. Names, dates, notes. Not accounts of madness or tragedy, but records of people, of quiet interventions, of disputes resolved without spectacle, of assistance given without acknowledgement. His knees bent before he realized it. He lowered himself into the chair. This was the house's secret. Not darkness, knowledge. He read until the words blurred, understanding growing heavier with each page. His grandmother had not hidden truths to control them. She had contained them to protect those who could not afford exposure. The reputation of the house had been intentional. Fear had been the shield. Marcus leaned back, eyes closing briefly. He understood now why no institution had been trusted with this place, why it had been left to him. This was not inheritance. This was guardianship. As Marcus stood to leave the study, Echo rose abruptly. Her head snapped toward the window. Marcus followed her gaze. Below, near the edge of the tree line, a figure stood, motionless, for just a second too long before stepping back out of sight. Marcus's pulse quickened, not with panic, but precision. Echo did not bark. She did not give chase. She simply watched the empty space where the figure had been. Marcus closed the study door behind him. The sound was final, controlled. The house was not as forgotten as everyone believed. The afternoon passed in focused silence. Marcus explored the remaining rooms, memorizing their layout, testing windows, checking structural integrity. Everything was solid, deliberate. The house had been built to last, overbuilt even. Thick stone walls, narrow exterior windows, reinforced beams visible in the ceiling, joists where plaster had cracked with age. By the time he returned to the foyer, the light had shifted, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The house settled around him with soft creaks, the sound of an old structure adjusting. Not threatening, but alive. Marcus stood near the door, hand resting against the wood. The house did not feel like a burden. It felt like a responsibility he had been prepared for without knowing. Echo lay near his feet, calm again. Her earlier alertness had faded into watchful ease. Marcus looked once more through the front window down the drive toward the gate. Whoever had been there had not come to frighten him. They had come to see if the house was still guarded. He turned back inside, locked the door. The sound was deliberate, final. Marcus slept in the house that night, not because he had planned to, but because leaving felt dishonest. The study door remained closed behind him. As he moved back through the halls, each step measured, each sound catalogued. The house creaked softly as evening settled, wood adjusting to cold the way an old body adjusted to weather. It was not the sound of warning. It was the sound of continuity. He chose a small bedroom on the second floor, one that faced the trees rather than the drive. The bed was made with military precision, the blankets folded in layers that suggested habit rather than haste. He set his pack down, removed his boots, and sat for a moment on the edge of the mattress, hands resting on his knees. Echo circled once before lying down near the door, her body angled outward. Guarding, but not tense. Marcus did not turn on the overhead light. He let the dim glow from the hall filter in just enough to soften the edges of the room. He lay back, fully clothed eyes on the ceiling, listening. Wind moved through the branches outside. Somewhere deeper in the house, a pipe ticked as it cooled. The building breathed around him, steady and unhurried. He thought of the ledgers, of names written in careful ink, of margins filled with context instead of accusation, of problems that had been contained, not erased. His grandmother had known things that could have shattered reputations, families' lives, and she had chosen restraint, silence as shield. Marcus understood that kind of choice. In his line of work, silence was often the difference between survival and spectacle. Sleep came in pieces. He woke once to the sound of Echo shifting her weight, another time to the faint thud of ice sliding from a branch onto the ground below. Each time he listened until the house settled again. Morning arrived without drama. Light seeped in, slowly pale and deliberate, touching the edges of furniture before reaching the floor. Marcus rose, stretched, and checked the windows. No signs of disturbance, no footprints near the drive that had not been there before. Echo drank, then returned to her post near the front door. Marcus brewed coffee in the kitchen. The smell was grounding, ordinary. He stood at the counter with the mug cradled between his hands, watching steam curl upward. This place had been prepared. Not for him specifically, but for someone who would notice. He spent the morning cataloging in his head. Rooms, supplies, structural integrity. The house was solid. The generator in the basement hummed when he tested its fuel tank 3/4 full. The water heater worked. The furnace kicked on without complaint. Someone had maintained this place. Recently. By late morning, Marcus locked the front door behind him and headed back down the hill. Briar Glen met him with the same cautious quiet as before, but something had shifted. Not much. Just enough. At the edge of the square, he nearly collided with a man stepping out of the diner. The man was in his early 70s, tall once, but now stooped slightly at the shoulders. His hair was white and thin, combed back with care, revealing a narrow forehead and deep-set eyes that missed very little. He wore a heavy coat that had been mended more than once, the cuffs darkened with age and use. His hands were steady, but his movements were deliberate, as if he measured each step before committing. "Sorry," the man said, stepping back. "No problem," Marcus replied. The man's gaze dropped to Echo. His eyes softened immediately. "Beautiful dog," he said. "She knows," Marcus said. That earned him a small smile. "You're the grandson," the man said. Not a question. Marcus nodded. The man hesitated, then extended a hand. "Henry Elwood." His grip was lighter than Marcus expected, but firm in intent. The handshake of someone who valued acknowledgement more than dominance. Marcus Thorne. "I know," Henry said gently. "Your grandmother helped me once, long time ago." Marcus felt his posture shift, subtle but immediate. "How?" he asked. Henry glanced around, then back toward the hill. That's not something she'd have wanted discussed in public. His eyes met Marcus's, but she was kind. Quietly. Marcus nodded. Henry squeezed his hand once more before letting go. "People talk," he said. "They always do. But they don't know what they're afraid of." With that, he turned and walked away, his steps slow but sure. Marcus watched him go, the weight of the encounter settling deeper than expected. He continued toward the hardware store. The same man from yesterday, Caleb stood outside loading lumber into the back of a pickup. He straightened when he saw Marcus wiping his hands on his jacket. In daylight, Caleb's features were clearer. The heavy brow, the squared jaw softened by age. The beard trimmed close but uneven at the edges. There was a scar along his left cheek, thin and pale, old enough to have lost its story. "You stayed," Caleb said. Marcus did not ask how he knew. "I did." Caleb studied his face, searching for something. "And it's not what people say." "No," Marcus agreed. Caleb snorted softly. "That's the most accurate description I've heard in decades." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of distant traffic filling the gap. "I saw someone near the tree line yesterday," Marcus said evenly. "By the house." Caleb's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Enough." "Wouldn't surprise me," he said after a beat. "Some folks don't like doors opening even when they've been shut too long." "Anyone in particular?" Marcus asked. Caleb shook his head. "If I knew, I wouldn't tell you yet." Marcus accepted that. Trust was not given all at once. "I'll need supplies," Marcus said. "Generator fuel, extra locks, motion lights." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "Planning on staying a while?" "I am." Caleb nodded once. "Then I'll help." That was all he said, but it was enough. The afternoon unfolded in pieces. Marcus visited the post office, then the small clinic at the edge of town. He introduced himself where necessary, observed where not. People responded with cautious politeness. No one challenged him. No one welcomed him outright. Echo remained close, her presence a quiet constant. Children watched her from a distance, curiosity edging out fear. One little girl, no more than 6, waved shyly from behind her mother's leg. Echo's tail moved once in response. By the time Marcus returned to the hill, the sky had begun to darken. Clouds gathered low and heavy, the kind that promised more than a light dusting. Inside the house, he secured doors and windows, tested locks, and set up temporary lighting in key areas. Practical steps, grounded ones. He returned to the study only once, standing in the doorway without crossing the threshold. The ledgers waited on their shelves, patient and orderly. He did not read further. Not yet. Some things required pacing. As evening settled, Marcus sat at the long dining table with a notebook. He sketched rough layouts and contingency plans, shelter capacity, heat zones, access points. It was instinctive planning for people before they arrived. Echo lay at his feet, head resting on her paws. Then she lifted it. Her ears angled toward the far end of the house. Not sharp, not alarmed. Curious. Echo rose and walked toward the hallway leading to the study. She stopped halfway, turned back to Marcus, and let out a low, questioning sound. Not a warning. An invitation. Marcus felt it again. That quiet pull. Not urgency. Alignment. He followed her to the threshold of the study and stood there, hand on the frame. The door remained closed. The house was still. Nothing demanded to be opened, but something acknowledged his presence. Marcus exhaled slow and steady. "Soon," he murmured. Echo sat satisfied and returned to her place by the table. Night fell fully. Marcus moved through the house one last time, checking doors, extinguishing lights, leaving only a single lamp burning in the foyer. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the staircase, at the stone walls that had borne so much weight without cracking. This place had not been feared because it was dangerous. It had been feared because it demanded integrity. Marcus turned the lock on the front door. The sound was final, deliberate. Whatever came next, the house would not face it alone. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, Echo following close behind. In the small bedroom, he removed his jacket and boots, then sat on the edge of the bed. Through the window, he could see the faint lights of Briar Glen below. The town looked small from here, fragile. Like something that could be protected if someone cared enough to try. Echo settled on the floor beside the bed, her breathing already slowing into the rhythm of sleep. Marcus lay back, staring at the ceiling. His right knee throbbed dully, a reminder of weight carried and distance traveled. He shifted, finding a position that eased the pressure. Tomorrow he would go back into the study. He would read more of the ledgers. He would begin to understand the full scope of what his grandmother had built here, what she had protected, what she had chosen him to continue. But tonight, he let himself simply be present, in this room, in this house, in this strange inheritance that felt less like a burden with each passing hour. Outside, the wind picked up again. The sound was familiar now, almost comforting. The voice of a place learning to speak to him. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in months, sleep came without resistance. When he woke, it was still dark. But something had changed. Echo was standing at the window, her body silhouetted against the faint pre-dawn light. Her ears were up. Her tail was still. Marcus sat up slowly, joints protesting. "What is it, girl?" Echo did not turn. She remained fixed on something outside. Marcus rose and crossed to the window. He looked out over the drive, the gate, the road that led down into town. At first he saw nothing, just darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then movement. A figure small and distant walking up the road toward the house. Marcus's pulse did not quicken. He simply watched. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, as if the approach itself required courage. Echo let out a soft sound, not a growl, not quite a whine, something in between. Recognition. Marcus dressed quickly, pulling on his boots as jacket. He moved downstairs with Echo at his side. By the time he reached the front door, the figure had stopped at the gate. Marcus turned on the porch light. It was a woman, older perhaps, in her late 60s. She wore a long coat and a scarf wrapped tightly against the cold. Her face was lined, her eyes tired but steady. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the way she held herself. Upright, despite the years. Determined, despite the fear. She stood at the gate, not entering, not leaving. Just waiting. Marcus opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit him immediately sharp and clean. His breath clouded in front of him. "Can I help you?" he called. The woman looked up at him. For a long moment, she did not speak. Her hands gripped the iron bars of the gate as if they were the only thing keeping her standing. Then, quietly, her voice carrying across the distance with surprising clarity, "I'm looking for Eleanor." Marcus felt the words settle in his chest. "She's gone," he said gently. 2 weeks ago. The woman's shoulders sagged, just slightly, as if something she had been bracing against had finally given way. "I know," she said. "I heard. She trailed off, looking up at the house. Her gaze moved across the windows, the stone walls, the steep roof. "I wanted to see it. One more time." Marcus descended the steps slowly, Echo beside him. His knee protested, but he ignored it. Each step deliberate, careful. "You knew her?" he said. It was not a question. "She helped me," the woman replied. Her voice was stronger now. "Long time ago, when no one else would." Marcus reached the gate. He studied her face in the dim light. The lines around her eyes spoke of years spent worrying. The set of her jaw spoke of years spent surviving. "What's your name?" "Lillian," she said. "Lillian Vance." The name settled in Marcus's mind like a key turning in a lock. He had seen it, in the ledgers, in his grandmother's careful handwriting, page after page of entries tracking years of quiet intervention. Lillian Vance. Mortgage forgiven. Husband's debt erased. Wife must never know. Marcus opened the gate. "Come inside," he said. Lillian hesitated. Her hands released the bars slowly, as if letting go of something she had been holding for a very long time. "I shouldn't," she said. "I just wanted to see it, to remember." "It's cold," Marcus said simply, "and the house is warm." Echo stepped forward, approaching Lillian slowly. She lowered her head, her posture gentle, non-threatening, patient. Lillian looked down at the dog. Her hand reached out tentative at first, then settled on Echo's head. Her fingers buried themselves in the thick fur. "I haven't touched a dog since my husband died," she whispered. Echo leaned into her touch. Solid. Present. Real. Lillian's eyes filled. She did not wipe the tears away. She let them fall silent and unchecked, as if they had been waiting years for permission. Marcus waited. He did not rush her. He did not speak. He simply stood there holding the gate open, offering what his grandmother had offered for 40 years. A place to come when there was nowhere else. Finally, Lillian nodded. She stepped through the gate. Together, the three of them walked up the drive toward the house that had been waiting, patient and enduring, for someone brave enough to return. The porch light cast long shadows across the gravel. The door stood open, warm light spilling out into the cold morning. Inside the house held its breath, and for the first time in 2 weeks, it did not feel empty. Tell us where you are watching from. Like and subscribe if this story speaks to you. Every follow helps keep stories like this alive. Now let's continue. The warmth of the house met them at the threshold. Not overwhelming, but present. The kind of warmth that came from a furnace that had been tended from walls built thick enough to hold heat against the Montana winter. Lillian stopped just inside the foyer, her eyes moving slowly across the space. The patterned rug, the polished coat rack, the tall windows that let in the pale morning light. Her breath caught just slightly, as if something about the room had reached into her chest and taken hold. "It hasn't changed," she said softly. "Not in 40 years. Marcus closed the door behind them. The sound was gentle, final. He did not ask how she knew what the house had looked like 40 years ago. Some questions answered themselves. Echo moved to Lillian's side, her body calm but attentive. She sat without being commanded, her shoulder just brushing against Lillian's leg. A point of contact, a reminder that she was not alone. Lillian's hand found Echo's head again, fingers moving through the fur with the kind of repetition that came from need rather than thought. "Would you like coffee?" Marcus asked. Lillian turned to him, her eyes still bright with tears she had not yet finished shedding. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Marcus said simply. He led her through the house to the kitchen. The room was clean and functional, the counters bare, except for the coffee maker he had found in the cabinet the day before. Sunlight angled through the window above the sink, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazy and unconcerned. Marcus poured 2 cups, black for himself. He offered cream and sugar to Lillian, but she shook her head. "Black is fine." They sat at the small table near the window. Echo lay between them, her body a bridge neither of them had asked for, but both seemed to need. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply sat holding their cups, looking out at the trees that surrounded the house. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood that some things could not be rushed. Finally, Lillian spoke. "She saved us," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "My husband and me. We were going to lose everything. The house, the land, everything we'd worked for." She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup. "And then one day the bank called. Said the debt had been paid. Anonymous donor." Marcus listened without interrupting. "Thomas, my husband, he knew," Lillian continued. "He figured it out somehow. He went to see her, tried to thank her. She wouldn't accept it. Told him it was a mistake, that the bank had corrected an error." Lillian's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "But Thomas knew, and he made me promise. If anything ever happened to him, if I was ever truly afraid I should come here, to this house." She looked down at her hands. "He died 3 years ago, and I've been afraid every day since." Marcus set his cup down carefully. "What are you afraid of?" Lillian met his eyes. "Being alone, being forgotten, dying without having mattered to anyone." The words hung in the air between them, honest and undefended. Marcus understood them. He had lived with those same fears for years, ever since the day in Iraq when he had given the order that sent 3 men to their deaths and left him standing in the sand alive and breathing and utterly alone. "You mattered to her," Marcus said. "My grandmother. You mattered enough that she spent her own money to save what you'd built." Lillian's eyes filled again. "I never got to thank her." "She didn't want thanks," Marcus replied. "She wanted you safe." They sat in silence again. Echo shifted, resting her head on Lillian's foot. The weight was small, but significant. After a while, Lillian spoke again. Why did she leave this place to you? Marcus considered the question. He had been asking himself the same thing since the will was read. I don't know yet, he said finally, but I think I'm supposed to find out. Lillian nodded slowly, as if this made sense to her in a way she could not quite articulate. Will you stay? She asked. In Briar Glen. Marcus looked around the kitchen, at the careful organization, the supplies stocked and labeled, the space prepared for something his grandmother had known was coming, even if she would not be there to see it. I think I have to, he said. Lillian reached across the table. Her hand was small and thin, the skin papery with age, but her grip was firm when it closed around his. Then you won't be alone, she said. The morning stretched on. Lillian stayed for another hour, moving slowly through the house, as if reacquainting herself with a place she had known only from a distance. She paused in doorways, her fingers trailing along door frames. She stood at windows, looking out at views she had imagined but never seen from this angle. In the study, she stopped completely. Marcus had left the door open. The ledgers were visible on their shelves, row after row of careful record-keeping. Lillian stepped inside her movements, tentative as if she were entering a sacred space. Her eyes found the desk, the open ledger, the page that bore her name. She crossed to it slowly, read the entry, read the dates, read the amounts that had been given without her knowledge or consent. When she turned back to Marcus, her face was wet with tears. All of this, she whispered, for us, for me. Marcus stood in the doorway, giving her space. For 47 families, he said quietly. You weren't the only one. Lillian's hand covered her mouth. She looked around the study at the shelves full of lives that had been touched and protected and held together by a woman who had asked for nothing in return. She was a saint, Lillian said. She was careful, Marcus corrected gently. She knew what people needed wasn't charity. It was dignity. Lillian nodded, understanding, settling over her features like recognition. She moved to one of the shelves and ran her fingers along the spines of the ledgers. Year after year, decade after decade, a lifetime of quiet work. What will you do with all of this? She asked. Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The ledgers were a record, but they were also a burden. Knowledge that could hurt as easily as it could heal. I'll keep them safe, he said. The way she did. Lillian turned to face him fully. You're like her, she said. More than you know. Marcus did not respond. He was not sure if it was true, but he was beginning to understand why his grandmother might have thought so. When Lillian finally left, the sun was high and the day had warmed just enough to take the sharpest edge off the cold. She stood at the gate looking back at the house one more time. Thank you, she said to Marcus, for letting me see it, for letting me understand. You can come back, Marcus told her, whenever you need to. Lillian smiled. It was a small smile, fragile as new ice, but real. I might take you up on that. She walked down the hill slowly, her steps more certain than they had been on the way up. Echo watched her go, tail moving in a slow, thoughtful wag. Marcus stood at the gate until Lillian disappeared around the bend in the road. Then he turned back to the house. There was work to do. The next 2 days passed in a rhythm of discovery and preparation. Marcus moved through the house, methodically cataloging what was there, understanding what his grandmother had built. In the basement, he found more than just the generator and fuel. There were shelves stocked with canned goods, blankets still wrapped in plastic medical supplies organized by type and expiration date, boxes labeled in his grandmother's handwriting, winter clothes, flashlights, batteries, water purification tablets. She had been preparing for something. Marcus stood in the basement looking at the supplies and felt understanding click into place. This was not just a house. It was a shelter. He went back to the study and read the ledgers more carefully. Not just the names and the amounts, but the notes in the margins. The context his grandmother had preserved. Family of 5. Father injured. Mother working 2 jobs. Children need stability. Widow. Pension not enough. Pride will not let her ask. Veteran PTSD needs quiet and space to heal. Page after page of people who had needed help but could not afford the shame of asking for it. His grandmother had given it anyway, quietly, invisibly, in a way that let them keep their dignity intact. Marcus closed the ledger and sat back in the chair. He understood now what she had been doing, and he understood what she was asking him to do. Not to save people, to hold space for them. On the 3rd day, Marcus returned to town. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to understand the place his grandmother had spent 40 years protecting. Caleb was waiting for him at the hardware store, a list already prepared. Generator fuel, Caleb said, checking items off. Extra propane, locks for the outbuildings, motion sensors. He looked up at Marcus. You planning on turning that place into a fortress? Just making it secure, Marcus replied. Caleb studied him for a moment, then nodded. Your grandmother did the same thing, every fall, like clockwork. She knew something was coming, Marcus said. She always did, Caleb agreed. He set the list down and leaned against the counter. Weather Service is calling for a big storm. Week from now, maybe sooner. Thanksgiving week. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, recognition. How big? Big enough that people will need help, Caleb said. His eyes were steady on Marcus's face. Question is, are you going to give it? Marcus did not hesitate. Yes. Caleb's expression did not change, but something in his posture relaxed. Good, because half this town has nowhere to go if the power goes out for more than a day. He paused. Your grandmother knew that. That's why she built what she built. Did people know, Marcus asked, that she was helping them? Some did, most didn't. Caleb shook his head slowly. She was careful about it. Made it look like luck or coincidence or bureaucratic error. Anything but what it was. Which was love, Caleb said simply. The kind that doesn't need to be seen. The words settled over Marcus like weight, like responsibility, like purpose. He loaded the supplies into his truck with Caleb's help. As he was about to leave, Caleb called after him. Marcus. He turned. You're not doing this alone, Caleb said. When the storm comes, there will be people willing to help. You just have to let them. Marcus nodded. He understood what Caleb was really saying. Trust would have to go both ways. That evening, Marcus stood on the porch of the house, looking down at Briar Glen as the sun set. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights flickered on in windows. The town looked peaceful, unaware. But Marcus knew better. He had seen enough in his years of service to recognize the signs of a place that was more fragile than it appeared. Infrastructure that was aging. Systems that were strained. People who were one disaster away from losing everything. His grandmother had seen it too, and she had spent her life building a safety net no one knew existed. Now it was his turn. Echo appeared at his side, her body warm against his leg. She looked up at him, eyes bright in the fading light. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I know." He went inside and began to prepare. The storm arrived exactly when the weather service said it would. On a Tuesday morning, 1 week before Thanksgiving, the sky darkened and the temperature dropped and the first snowflakes began to fall. They fell slowly at first, lazy and sparse, but within an hour the wind picked up and the snow came harder, driven sideways by gusts that rattled the windows and howled around the corners of the house. Marcus had been ready. The generator was running. The heat was on. The supplies were organized and accessible. He had cleared paths through the house, designated sleeping areas, set up a triage station in what had been his grandmother's sitting room. He had done everything he could think of. Now he waited. The call came at 10 in the morning. Caleb's voice rough with cold and urgency. "Power's out in town. Lines are down. We've got elderly folks with no heat. Families with small children. The shelter at the church can't take everyone." Marcus did not hesitate. "Send them here." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "All right." Caleb paused. "I'll bring the first group myself." Marcus hung up and looked at Echo. She was already standing body alert, tail still. "Time to work," he said. She followed him to the door. They came in groups of 3 and 4. Old couples who walked slowly supporting each other. Single mothers with children bundled against the cold. A veteran in his 80s who refused help until Echo approached him and sat quietly at his feet. Marcus met each of them at the door. He did not ask questions. He did not require explanations. He simply opened the door and let them in. Within 2 hours, there were 15 people in the house. Within 4 hours, there were 30. The house absorbed them all. Caleb arrived with the second wave, his truck loaded with supplies people had brought from their own homes. Blankets, food, bottled water. He moved through the house with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, organizing without taking charge, helping without hovering. In the kitchen, a woman Marcus did not know had begun making soup. Her name was Iris, she told him. Dr. Iris Brennan, retired nurse. Her daughter had been one of the families his grandmother had helped years ago. "I owe her this," Iris said, simply stirring the pot. Marcus did not argue. By early afternoon, the storm had intensified. Wind speeds that made it dangerous to be outside. Snow that fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet. The temperature had dropped to single digits and was still falling. Marcus made one more trip into town with Caleb, the truck fighting for traction on roads that were already impassable in places. They found 12 more people who needed shelter. One of them was Lillian. She was in her house, sitting in the dark, wrapped in every blanket she owned. When Marcus knocked on the door, she opened it with hands that shook from cold. "I didn't want to bother you," she said. "You're not a bother," Marcus replied. "You're coming with us." She did not argue. On the drive back up the hill, Lillian sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap. Echo was in the back seat, her head resting on the console between the front seat's eyes, watching Lillian with steady attention. When they reached the house, Lillian looked up at it through the snow and wind. Her lips moved, but Marcus could not hear what she said. Inside the house was full of sound, voices, movement, the hum of the generator beneath it all. People had claimed spaces, spread out blankets, begun to settle in with the resignation of those who knew they would be there for a while. Iris appeared at Marcus's elbow. "We're at capacity," she said quietly. 42 people. We can fit more if we need to, but it'll be tight." "We'll manage," Marcus said. Iris nodded. She looked around the foyer at the people who filled it, and something in her expression softened. Eleanor would be proud. Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. The afternoon wore on. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Marcus moved through the house, checking on people, making sure everyone had what they needed. Echo followed him, her presence a constant that seemed to calm people more effectively than any words Marcus could offer. In one corner, a child was crying. A little girl no more than 5, overwhelmed by the noise and the crowd and the strangeness of it all. Echo went to her without being asked. She lay down beside the child, her body warm and solid and utterly calm. The girl's hand found Echo's fur, buried itself in the thick coat. The crying slowed, then stopped. The girl's mother looked at Marcus with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Thank you," she mouthed. Marcus nodded and moved on. He found Lillian in the study. She was standing in front of the shelves looking at the ledgers, her hand resting on one of the spines. "There are so many," she said when she heard him enter. 40 years, Marcus replied. Lillian turned to face him. "What are you going to do after the storm?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question. The house could not remain a secret forever. Not after this. Too many people would know. Too many people would have questions. "I don't know yet," he admitted. Lillian nodded. She crossed to where he stood and looked up at him. Despite the difference in their heights, despite the years between them, there was something in her gaze that made Marcus feel like she was seeing him more clearly than he could see himself. "You're scared," she said. It was not a question. Marcus did not deny it. Yes. Of what, he thought about the question. About all the things that had been chasing him since the day he came back from Iraq. The guilt, the anger, the crushing weight of having survived when others had not. Of making the wrong choice, he said finally. Of people getting hurt because I wasn't good enough. Lillian reached out and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You're already making the right choice," she said. "You're here. You're helping. That's all anyone can ask." Marcus wanted to believe her, but the fear was still there, coiled tight in his chest, waiting for him to fail. As if sensing his thoughts, Echo appeared in the doorway. She crossed to him and pressed her body against his leg, solid and warm and real. Marcus looked down at her, at the amber eyes that watched him with unwavering trust, at the body that had learned to read his moods before he felt them himself. He took a breath, let it out slowly. "Okay," he said quietly. Lillian squeezed his hand once more, then let go. Together they returned to the main room where the others waited. Evening fell early, the sky dark long before it should have been. The storm continued without pause, wind and snow battering the house with relentless intensity. Inside, people had begun to adapt. Small routines were forming. Someone had found a deck of cards and started a game in one corner. Children were coloring with supplies someone had brought. The soup Iris had made was distributed in mismatched bowls, eaten with quiet gratitude. Marcus stood near the window looking out at the wall of white that had swallowed the world beyond the glass. Echo sat at his feet, her body relaxed but alert. Caleb approached holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Marcus. "Hell of a storm," Caleb said. "Yeah." They stood in silence for a moment, drinking the coffee, watching the snow. "Your grandmother did this," Caleb said after a while. "Opened the house during the storm of '98. Sheltered 20 people for 3 days. Marcus turned to look at him. I didn't know that. Not many people do. She was careful about it. Caleb smiled faintly. But I was one of the 20. Me and my son. Marcus waited. My wife had just died. Caleb continued, his voice low and steady. Cancer, fast and mean, left me with a 9-year-old boy and no idea how to keep going. He paused. Power went out during the worst cold snap in 50 years. We were freezing. I was about to do something stupid when Eleanor showed up at my door, told me to pack a bag and follow her. He took a sip of coffee. She saved us that night, not just from the cold, from what I might have done. Marcus felt the words settle into him, heavy and true. What happened to your son? He asked quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened, just for a moment, then relaxed. Lost him 6 years later. Lightning strike. He was 17. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry. Eleanor was there for that too, Caleb said. Sat with me for hours. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. Just sat. He turned to Marcus, his pale blue eyes steady. You remind me of her. The way you move through people. Present but not intrusive. Helping but not hovering. I don't feel like I know what I'm doing, Marcus admitted. Nobody does, Caleb replied. But you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder, once then moved away to help an elderly man find a blanket. Marcus stayed at the window, looking out at the storm, feeling the weight of all the lives sheltered within these walls. The weight was heavy, but it was not unbearable. Night deepened. The storm raged on. But inside the house, something had shifted. The initial tension of strangers forced together had begun to ease. People were talking, sharing stories, finding common ground in the simple fact of survival. Marcus moved through it all, checking on people, making adjustments, solving small problems before they became large ones. His knee ached from the constant movement, but he ignored it. Echo stayed close, her presence, a grounding force that kept him centered when the noise and the needs threatened to overwhelm. Around 10 o'clock, as Marcus was helping Iris reorganize the medical supplies, a sharp sound cut through the general murmur of the house. A crash, metal on stone. Then silence. Marcus turned toward the source, the kitchen. He moved quickly, Echo at his heels. When he reached the kitchen doorway, he stopped. A man stood near the counter, breathing hard. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that came from holding back something volatile. A pot lay on the floor where he had knocked its soup, spreading across the tile. The man's hands were shaking. His eyes were unfocused, staring at something no one else could see. Marcus recognized the signs immediately. He had lived with them for years. He approached slowly, hands visible movements, deliberate and non-threatening. Hey, he said quietly. You're okay. You're safe here. The man's gaze snapped to him. For a moment, Marcus saw pure panic, then confusion, then the slow, painful return of awareness. I'm sorry, the man said, his voice rough. I didn't mean... It's okay, Marcus replied. He stayed where he was, giving the man space. Just breathe. You're safe. The man's chest heaved. He looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. His hands were still shaking. Echo moved forward. Not to Marcus, but to the man. She approached slowly, her body low and non-threatening. When she reached him, she sat and looked up at him with steady, patient eyes. The man stared down at her. His breathing was still ragged, but it was slowing. Can I touch her? He asked. She'd like that, Marcus said. The man's hand reached out hesitant, then settled on Echo's head. His fingers buried themselves in her fur. She leaned into the touch, solid and warm and utterly calm. The man's breathing slowed further. The shaking in his hands began to ease. Marcus waited. He did not push, did not ask questions. He simply stood there present and patient until the man was ready. Finally, the man spoke. Afghanistan, 2012. Iraq, 2016. Marcus replied. The man's eyes met his. Understanding passed between them, wordless and complete. It never really goes away, does it? The man said. No, Marcus agreed. But it gets quieter. The man nodded. He looked down at Echo at his hand still buried in her fur. She helps. She does. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then the man straightened, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I'll clean this up, he said, gesturing to the spilled soup. We'll do it together, Marcus replied. They cleaned the mess in silence, Echo watching from the doorway. When they finished, the man extended his hand. Garrett, he said. Marcus. They shook. No more words were needed. As Garrett returned to the main room, Caleb appeared in the hallway. He had been watching. You handled that well, he said. Marcus shrugged. I've been there. I know, Caleb replied. That's why you could help him. Marcus did not respond. He simply moved on to the next thing that needed doing. The night stretched on. People began to settle into sleep, claiming corners and couches, spreading blankets on the floor. The house creaked and groaned around them, but it held. Solid. Enduring. Marcus made a final circuit of the house, checking doors, adjusting the heat, making sure everyone had what they needed. In the study, he found Lillian sitting in his grandmother's chair, a ledger open in her lap. She looked up when he entered. I hope you don't mind, she said. I couldn't sleep. I don't mind. She looked back down at the ledger. I've been reading the entries, trying to understand how she kept track of it all, how she knew who needed help. She paid attention, Marcus said. That's all. Lillian nodded slowly. It's not all, though. She cared, deeply, about people she barely knew. She looked up at Marcus. That takes a special kind of strength. Marcus thought about that, about the years his grandmother had spent watching the town from this hill, recording needs, providing help, never asking for recognition. Or a special kind of loneliness, he said quietly. Lillian's expression shifted. You think she was lonely? I think she loved from a distance because it was safer, Marcus replied. I think she knew how to protect people, but not how to let them close. The words hung in the air between them, true and uncomfortable. Is that what you're doing? Lillian asked gently. Keeping people at a distance. Marcus met her eyes. He thought about deflecting, about changing the subject, about falling back into the comfortable patterns of isolation he had built over years of practice. But Lillian was looking at him with such open honesty that evasion felt like betrayal. Yes, he admitted. Why? Because everyone I get close to gets hurt, Marcus said. The words came out harder than he intended. I gave an order in Iraq. Wrong call, wrong timing. 3 men died because I wasn't good enough. Lillian's face softened with understanding. And you think keeping people away will protect them? I know it will. No, Lillian said firmly. You don't. You think it will. But what it actually does is protect you. From grief. From guilt. From having to try again. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt his chest tighten. I can't, he said. I can't risk it. Lillian stood. She crossed to where he stood and took both his hands in hers. Marcus, look around this house. Look at all these people who are warm and fed and safe because you opened the door, because you chose to try. Her grip tightened. You're already risking it. The only question is whether you're going to let yourself feel it. Marcus looked down at their joined hands, at the age spots on her skin, at the strength in her grip, despite the fragility of her frame. He thought about Echo, about how she had refused to let him push her away even when he tried, about how she had learned to read his fear before he felt it and had chosen every single time to stay. He thought about Caleb, about Iris, about Garrett and all the others who had accepted his help without question, who had trusted him enough to be vulnerable in his presence. He thought about his grandmother who had spent 40 years loving people from a distance because she believed it was the only way to keep them safe. And he realized with sudden and painful clarity that he did not want to become her. He wanted to be something different, something braver. I don't know how, he said quietly. Lillian smiled. You start by staying, that's all. Just stay. She released his hands and returned to the chair, picking up the ledger again, as if the conversation had not just turned Marcus's understanding of himself inside out. Marcus stood there for a moment longer, then turned and left the study. Echo was waiting in the hall. She fell into step beside him as he descended the stairs. The main room was quiet now, filled with the sound of sleeping people. Soft breathing, the occasional rustle of blankets, the creak of the house settling. Marcus moved to the window and looked out. The storm was still raging, but it seemed less violent now. Or perhaps he was simply less afraid of it. Echo pressed against his leg. He rested his hand on her head, feeling the solid warmth of her beneath his palm. We're doing okay, aren't we, girl? He said quietly. Echo's tail wagged once, slow and deliberate. Marcus smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, but real. He stood there for a long time, watching the storm, feeling the weight of all the lives sheltered within these walls. The weight was heavy, but he was not carrying it alone. And for the first time in 6 years, that felt like enough. Morning came slowly, the darkness lifting by degrees, until the world beyond the windows resolved into shades of gray and white. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the sun break through clouds that were already beginning to thin. The landscape had been transformed. Snow covered everything smooth and unmarked, erasing roads and fences and the familiar boundaries between things. Behind him, the house was beginning to wake. The sounds of movement, quiet voices, the shuffle of feet on stone floors. Echo sat at his feet, her body warm against his leg. She had not left his side since the first person arrived yesterday morning. Even in sleep, she had stayed close, her body positioned between Marcus and the door guarding without being asked. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his hair still flattened on one side from sleep. Roads are buried, he said, without preamble. No one's getting down that hill for at least a day, maybe 2. Marcus nodded. He had expected as much. We have enough supplies, Caleb asked, for 3 days, maybe 4 if we're careful. We'll be careful. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them looking out at the transformed world. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice quieter. You did good yesterday. Eleanor would have been proud. Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. Caleb clapped him once on the shoulder and moved away to help with breakfast preparations. The day unfolded with a strange rhythm of people forced into proximity. There was awkwardness at first, the uncomfortable awareness of personal space invaded, of privacy surrendered. But necessity smoothed the edges. People needed to eat. Children needed to be entertained. Space needed to be shared. Marcus watched it happen with something close to wonder. The way strangers became neighbors. The way small acts of kindness multiplied. Someone sharing their last granola bar with a child who was still hungry. Someone else giving up the comfortable chair to an elderly man whose back was bothering him. Lillian moved through it all with quiet efficiency, organizing without taking charge, helping without hovering. She had claimed the kitchen as her domain, and people deferred to her, naturally drawn to the calm competence she radiated. Marcus found her there mid-morning, rolling out dough for biscuits with flour, dusting her hands and forearms. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "I know, but I want to." She paused, her hands stilling on the rolling pin. "For 40 years, I received help I didn't know I was getting. Now I finally get to give something back." Marcus understood that. The need to balance the scales, to transform gratitude into action. "Can I help?" he asked. Lillian smiled. "You can cut the biscuits. There's a cutter in that drawer." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind that came from shared purpose rather than forced conversation. Around them, the house hummed with life, voices, laughter, the sound of children playing some invented game that involved a great deal of running and shrieking. Echo had stationed herself in the main room, lying in a spot where she could see all the doorways at once. Children gravitated to her throughout the morning, drawn by the calm patience she radiated. She tolerated their attention with stoic grace, allowing small hands to pat her head and pull gently at her ears. One little girl, no more than 4, spent nearly an hour sitting beside Echo, talking to her in a steady stream of consciousness narration about nothing and everything. Echo listened as if every word mattered. Marcus watched from the doorway, something tight in his chest loosening just slightly. The girl's name was Nola, he learned later. She was in foster care, staying with a family in Briar Glen temporarily. The woman who had brought her a tired-looking foster mother in her 50s watched with grateful relief as Echo kept the child occupied and calm. "She doesn't talk much normally," the woman said to Marcus. "Not since she came to us 3 months ago. Whatever happened before it left her scared of most things. But your dog, she trusts your dog." Marcus looked at Nola, at the way her small hand rested on Echo's shoulder, at the way her voice had grown stronger and more animated as she spoke. "Echo has that effect," he said quietly. Marcus watched it happen with growing amazement. These people, most of whom had been strangers to each other 48 hours ago, were coming together around a shared purpose, arguing passionately about window placements and shelving designs, laughing over Sophie's terrible handwriting, finding common ground in the simple act of building something together. Lillian sat at the far end of the table, Thomas's notebook open in front of her, tears streaming silently down her face as she watched his dream take shape in the hands of people who had never known him. Marcus caught her eye. She smiled at him through her tears and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." A woman named Iris Brennan, who had identified herself as a retired nurse, approached Marcus as the planning session wound down. She was in her mid-40s, with short dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that missed very little. "This is good," she said, gesturing at the sketches and notes covering the table. Giving people purpose. My daughter was one of the families Eleanor helped years ago. Medical bills we couldn't pay. They just disappeared one day. Anonymous donor, the hospital said. She paused. I always suspected it was her. Now I know it was. You want to help, Marcus said. It was not a question. I do. However I can. We'll need medical oversight if this becomes a regular shelter. Someone who knows what they're doing. Iris nodded. I can do that. They shook hands, and Marcus felt the circle expanding. Not just a house anymore, not just a temporary shelter. Something more permanent was taking shape, built on the foundation his grandmother had laid over 40 years. Evening came, and with it a shift in the atmosphere. The planning session had done what Marcus hoped it would. People were calmer, more settled. The restless energy had been channeled into something productive. Dinner was a communal affair, everyone contributing what they could. The food was simple, but there was plenty of it, and people ate with the good appetite that came from feeling useful. After the meal, someone suggested music. An older man named Walter produced a harmonica from his pocket and began to play. Slowly, tentatively, others joined in. A woman sang. Children clapped along, not quite on beat, but enthusiastic. Marcus stood at the edge of the room watching. He was not part of it, not really. He was still the observer, the outsider, the one who helped, but did not belong. But he wanted to be. The realization hit him with unexpected force. He wanted to be part of this, not just the organizer or the provider, but actually part of it. Connected, belonging. The wanting felt dangerous, like stepping toward the edge of something high and uncertain. Echo pressed against his leg as if sensing the direction of his thoughts. He looked down at her, at the amber eyes that watched him with steady patience. You think I can do this, don't you? He murmured. Her tail wagged once. Marcus took a breath, let it out slowly. Then he stepped forward into the room, into the circle of people gathered around the music. He did not sing. He did not play. He simply stood there present and accounted for one body among many. Nola appeared at his side, looking up at him with solemn eyes. She took his hand without asking, her small fingers wrapping around two of his. Echo says you're good, she said. It was the first time Marcus had heard her speak directly to him. Echo's smart, Marcus replied. She says you're sad sometimes, like me. Marcus felt something catch in his throat. He knelt down so he was at her eye level. Yeah, I am sometimes. Does she help you too? Every day. Nola nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. I want a dog like her when I grow up. That's a good goal, Marcus said. She squeezed his hand once, then returned to Echo's side, settling back into her spot on the floor. Marcus straightened his knee, protesting, and found Lillian watching him with knowing eyes. You're good with her, Lillian said. I don't know what I'm doing. None of us do. But you're doing it anyway. The night deepened. The music faded. People began to drift toward their claimed spaces, preparing for another night in the house that had become their temporary refuge. Marcus made his rounds, checking on people, making sure everyone had what they needed. His knee was aching badly now, the constant movement of the past 2 days catching up with him. He tried not to limp, but Echo noticed. She adjusted her pace to match his, staying close, providing a point of stability. In the hallway outside the study, he encountered Garrett. The man was standing at the window, looking out at the moonlit snow, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Can't sleep? Marcus asked. Garrett shook his head. Too quiet. I know that doesn't make sense, but It makes sense, Marcus assured him. The quiet is when it gets loud. Garrett turned to look at him. How do you deal with it? Marcus considered the question. 6 years ago, he would have said he did not deal with it. He would have said he just endured gritting his teeth and pushing through each day without looking too closely at what was churning beneath the surface. But that was before Echo, before this house, before he had been forced to confront the fact that endurance was not the same as healing. I had to learn to ask for help, Marcus said finally, and I had to learn to accept it when it was offered. That's it. That's enough to start with. Garrett nodded slowly, processing this. The dog helps, doesn't she? More than anything else. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them looking out at the transformed landscape. This place, Garrett said quietly. What you're doing here. It matters. You know that, right? Marcus did not know how to respond. He had spent so long believing that everything he touched turned to ash that the idea of mattering felt foreign, impossible. But looking around at the house full of people who were warm and safe and fed, it was hard to deny that something good was happening here. Something that went beyond simple survival. I'm just opening the door, Marcus said. They're the ones doing the rest. You keep telling yourself that, Garrett replied with a slight smile. But we both know it's not true. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder, once then headed back to his sleeping area, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway. Echo sat down beside him, leaning her weight against his leg. Marcus looked down at her. Am I doing the right thing? She did not answer, of course, but her presence was answer enough. He returned to the study, closing the door quietly behind him. The ledgers waited on their shelves, patient and unchanging. 40 years of his grandmother's work. 40 years of quiet intervention and careful record-keeping. Marcus pulled down the most recent volume and opened it to the last entry. His grandmother's handwriting still neat, despite the tremor that must have been affecting her hands by then. Marcus Thorne. Inherited house 3 years ago on paper. Waited to tell him until the right storm. He knows what it means to carry weight. He knows what it means to fail. He will understand why this place must continue. He will understand because he has no choice. The storm is coming. He will open the door because there is no one else who can. Marcus read the words 3 times, each repetition settling them deeper into his understanding. She had known. All of it. The storm. His resistance. His fear. His inevitable surrender to what needed to be done. She had prepared everything except the one thing she could not control. Whether he would have the courage to actually do it. Marcus closed the ledger and sat back in the chair. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Not storm wind, but the restless movement of air seeking equilibrium. The house creaked softly around him, familiar sounds now, comforting in their consistency. He thought about Lillian's words from the night before. You start by staying, that's all. Just stay. He thought about the reading room they would build. About the community forming in the spaces between crisis, about the way people were learning to rely on each other to trust that help would be there when it was needed. He thought about Echo, who had refused to let him push her away, who had learned his fears and his triggers and had chosen every single time to stay close, to be present, to remind him that he was not alone, even when he desperately wanted to be. Marcus stood and crossed to the window. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows. Below Briar, Glen was invisible under its blanket of snow, but he could imagine it. The houses dark and cold. The people scattered and isolated. Except for the ones here. The ones who had made it to shelter before the storm hit. 42 people who were safe because his grandmother had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. Because she had believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that someone would come along who was broken enough to understand the work and whole enough to continue it. Marcus pressed his hand against the cold glass. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I'm staying." The words felt like a vow, like a promise made to someone who could no longer hear it, but who had trusted him to make it anyway. He turned away from the window and found Echo waiting by the door, her eyes bright in the dim light. Together they left the study and made their way through the quiet house, checking doors one last time, turning off lights, leaving only the small lamp in the foyer burning. In the main room, people slept in clusters. Families huddled together. Strangers who had become neighbors, sharing blankets and space. The room was warm, the air thick with the sound of breathing. Marcus stood in the doorway, taking it in, memorizing it. This was what his grandmother had built. Not a house, but a sanctuary. A place where people could come when there was nowhere else. Where they could be vulnerable without shame. Where they could rest without fear. And now it was his to protect. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing, should have sent him running for the door, desperate to escape before he failed again. But standing there with Echo at his side and Lillian's words still echoing in his mind, Marcus felt something different. He felt ready. The next morning brought clear skies and temperatures that climbed just enough to suggest the worst was over. The snow was still too deep for travel, but the immediate crisis had passed. People began to talk about going home, about checking on their houses, about returning to the lives they had left behind when the storm hit. But no one left. Not because they could not. The roads would be passable within a day, maybe two. But because something had shifted. Something that went beyond simple gratitude for shelter. They had become a community. It happened in small ways. Walter teaching a group of children how to play the harmonica. Sophie sketching design ideas with anyone who wanted to contribute. Garrett organizing a work crew to clear paths around the house, giving people a way to burn off energy while feeling useful. Lillian orchestrating meals that stretched supplies while somehow making everyone feel fed. And Echo moving through it all with patient grace, accepting attention from children and adults alike, providing a point of calm in the organized chaos. Marcus watched it happen with a feeling he could not quite name. Not pride exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that felt like hope beginning to unfold. On the third day, Caleb pulled him aside. "We need to talk about what happens next," Caleb said. They were standing on the porch looking out at the work crew clearing snow from the drive. The air was cold, but still, and sunlight glinted off ice crystals like scattered diamonds. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "This," Caleb gestured at the house, at the people working and talking and living within it. "What you've created here. It can't just end when everyone goes home." Marcus had been thinking the same thing, but had not known how to articulate it. "What are you suggesting?" "Make it official," Caleb said. "The reading room is a good start, but it's more than that. This house could be a real community center, a place people can come when they need help, when they need connection." He paused. "It's what Eleanor wanted all along. She just didn't know how to make it happen without exposing what she'd been doing." "But I'm not her," Marcus said. I don't have her resources, her knowledge of the town. No, Caleb agreed. But you have something she didn't. You have us. He turned to face Marcus fully. You open the door. Let us help you keep it open. Marcus looked out at the people working. At Garrett directing the snow clearing with military precision. At Sophie measuring dimensions for the reading room. At Lillian talking with a group of women about organizing a weekly gathering. They were already doing it. Building something that would outlast the storm. Creating connections that would hold even after everyone returned to their separate lives. Okay, Marcus said. Let's make it official. Caleb smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine. Eleanor knew what she was doing when she left this place to you. The planning began that afternoon, not just for the reading room, but for what would come after. How the house would operate. Who would maintain it? How people could contribute without feeling like charity recipients. It was messy and complicated and sometimes frustrating. People had strong opinions, different visions, conflicting priorities, but they worked through it because they had learned over 3 days of forced proximity how to listen, how to compromise, how to put the common good ahead of individual preference. Marcus facilitated more than led. He asked questions, clarified confusions, made sure quieter voices were heard. It was not a role he was comfortable with, but it was one he could manage. And Echo helped. Her presence seemed to calm heated discussions. More than once, when tensions rose, someone would reach down to pet her, and the simple act of touching her fur would drain the anger from their voice. One moment stood out. A disagreement had broken out about whether the reading room should have rigid hours or be available whenever someone needed it. Voices were rising. Positions were hardening. Then Nola, who had been sitting quietly with Echo in the corner, spoke up. Echo doesn't have hours, she said. Her voice was small but clear. She's just there when you need her. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at the little girl sitting with her hand resting on the dog's head. That's what this place should be, Nola continued. Like Echo. Sophie was the first to speak. She's right. One by one, the others nodded. The tension drained from the room. The conversation shifted from rigid structures to flexible support, from rules to responsiveness. Marcus caught Lillian's eye. She was smiling, tears on her cheeks. From the mouth of babes, she whispered. By evening, they had a plan. Rough and incomplete, but real. The house would become a community space. The reading room would be built in what was currently the formal dining room. Weekly gatherings would be organized. A fund would be established with people contributing what they could when they could. The next week brought clear purpose. Construction on the reading room began in earnest. The sound of hammers and saws filled the house with productive energy. It was the drill that did it. Sophie was measuring studs for the new shelving when someone powered up a cordless drill nearby. The high-pitched whine cut through the air, sharp and sudden. Marcus froze. The sound morphed in his mind. Not a drill. A helicopter turbine. Spinning up. The same pitch. The same frequency that had preceded the explosion. His hands went cold. His vision tunneled. But this time, something was different. Echo was across the room, lying beside Nola. She lifted her head, watching, waiting. But she did not come to him. Marcus felt his chest tightening, the familiar panic rising, but instead of surrendering to it, he did what Echo had taught him. He looked at his hands, flexed his fingers, felt the solidity of the floor beneath his boots. He breathed. 1, 2, 3, slow and deliberate. I'm here, he said quietly. I'm safe. The sound resolved back into a drill. Just a drill. Nothing more. The panic ebbed. Marcus looked up. Across the room, Lillian was watching him. She had seen it all. The freeze, the recovery. She smiled, soft and knowing. You're healing, she said. Echo's tail thumped once against the floor. Approval. Pride even. Marcus nodded slowly. For the first time, he believed it might be true. And Marcus would be the steward. Not the owner in any meaningful sense, but the keeper. The one who maintained the space and made sure it remained available to those who needed it. It was more responsibility than he had planned to take on, more connection than he had thought himself capable of. But standing in the room full of people who had come together to build something good, Marcus found he wanted it anyway. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He made his way to the study, Echo following as always. He lit the lamp on the desk and pulled down his grandmother's final ledger again. As he reached for the ledger, his hand brushed against something wedged between two volumes. An envelope, smaller than the others, older. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. Marcus, if you found this, you've stayed. You've opened the door. You've done what I could not. Inside this envelope is something I've kept hidden for 40 years. Not from shame, but from pain. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a military dog tag on a silver chain. The metal was worn smooth in places from handling. CPT. James Thorne. U.S. Army, 1952 to 1974, your grandfather. He died in Vietnam when your father was 2 years old. I was 23. I loved him more than I understood love could hurt. And when he died, I decided never to let anyone that close again. I spent 40 years helping people from a distance because I was terrified of losing someone I loved up close. I built walls and called them boundaries. I built solitude and called it strength. Don't make my mistake, Marcus. The house is strong enough to hold grief. It's strong enough to hold joy. Let it hold both. Let them close. Eleanor Marcus sat in the chair, the dog tag cold in his palm. He thought about his grandmother, young and grieving, making a choice that would shape the next 4 decades. He thought about himself making the same choice for the same reasons, and he thought about the people who had refused to let him make it. Lillian, Caleb, Echo, the ones who had shown him that love was not the opposite of loss. It was the answer to it. Marcus fastened the chain around his neck. The dog tag settled against his chest over his heart. I understand now, he said quietly to the empty room. Thank you for trusting me with this. Echo rested her chin on his knee, and Marcus began to write in the new ledger, no longer recording isolation but connection. This time he read past the entry about himself. He read the entries before it. Names and dates and quiet interventions stretching back months and years. Each entry was a story. A crisis averted. A family saved. A dignity preserved. His grandmother had known all of these stories, had carried all of these secrets, had borne the weight of an entire town's hidden struggles, and she had done it alone. Marcus felt the enormity of it settle over him, the loneliness of it, the toll it must have taken to love so deeply while keeping such distance. He did not want that. He did not want to carry this weight alone. And thanks to the storm, thanks to the 42 people who had sheltered here and learned to see each other, he did not have to. Marcus pulled down a fresh ledger from the shelf, one of several his grandmother had left blank, waiting. He opened it to the first page and picked up a pen. At the top, in handwriting that was nothing like his grandmother's careful script, he wrote November, storm shelter, 42 people, 3 days, community formed, reading room planned. This is not my grandmother's work continued. This is something new, something shared. This is the beginning. Below that, he began to write names, not people who needed help, people who had offered it. Caleb Merrick, builder, silent grief, lost son to lightning, knows the cost of moving forward. Iris Brennan, medical oversight, daughter helped by Eleanor, paying it forward. Sophie Ward, designer, young but wise, sees potential in empty spaces. Garrett Miller, veteran, Afghanistan, understands the weight, knows how to carry it with others. Lillian Vance, heart of this place, received help unknown for 40 years, now gives openly what was given secretly. Walter Gaines, music maker, knows every gathering needs joy. He wrote until his hand cramped, writing down every person who had stayed, every skill they had offered, every piece of themselves they had contributed. This was different from his grandmother's ledgers. Those had been records of need met secretly. This was a record of community built openly. When he finished, he sat back and looked at what he had written. 42 names, 42 people who had come together in crisis and discovered connection. 42 reasons to believe this could work. Echo rested her head on his knee. He reached down and scratched behind her ears. "We're not alone anymore, girl," he said softly. "None of us are." Her tail thumped against the floor. 2 weeks later, the reading room was finished. The community gathered to celebrate. Not a grand opening, just neighbors coming together over coffee and pie. Children ran through the space, marveling at the shelves already beginning to fill with donated books. Adults tested the chairs, traced fingers over the plaque that read, Thomas Vance Memorial Reading Room. Outside, someone had brought fireworks, small ones, celebrating the completion. The first one went off with a sharp crack. Nola, who had been laughing a moment before, went rigid. Her eyes widened. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. Marcus saw it happen, recognized it instantly. He crossed to her and knelt down so they were eye level. Echo followed, positioning herself beside the child without being asked. "Nola," Marcus said quietly. "Look at me." She did, her eyes swimming with tears. "Count with me," he said. 1. Her breath hitched. 2. Marcus continued, his voice steady and calm. Nola's lips moved. 2. 3. You're doing great. Keep going. 4. 4, she whispered. Her breathing began to slow. Her body began to relax. 5, they said together. Echo leaned against Nola's side. The child's hand found the dog's fur automatically. "You're safe," Marcus said. "I promise." Nola looked up at him with eyes that understood too much for someone so young. How do you know Marcus thought about the answer? About all the times Echo had told him the same thing without words. "Because I was scared like you," he said. "And someone taught me that being afraid doesn't mean you're alone. It just means you're brave enough to feel." Nola's foster mother appeared, tears on her face. She's never let anyone calm her like that before. Marcus stood his knee, protesting. She just needed to know someone understood. Later, as the celebration continued inside, Marcus stood on the porch with Echo. Lillian joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You gave her what you needed most," Lillian said. "Someone who knows the weight." Marcus looked through the window at Nola, who was laughing now, showing Echo's drawing to another child. "Maybe that's what this place is really for," he said. "Not fixing people, just holding them until they remember they're not broken." Lillian smiled. Eleanor would have loved that. The storm's aftermath lingered for 2 more days. Roads were cleared slowly. Power was restored in stages. People began to return to their homes, trickling out in small groups as access became possible. Each departure was marked by gratitude, by promises to return, by the exchange of phone numbers and addresses, by hugs that lasted longer than strictly necessary. Marcus stood at the door for each goodbye, Echo at his side, accepting thanks with awkward grace. When Garrett left, he shook Marcus's hand and held it for a long moment. "You saved my life," Garrett said quietly. "Not from the storm, from what comes after." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. When Sophie left, she handed him a rolled-up set of plans. "For the reading room," she said, "I'll be back next week to help start construction." "You don't have to," Marcus said. "I know," Sophie replied. "That's why I want to." When Walter left, he pressed his harmonica into Marcus's hand. "For the next gathering," he said, "every community needs music." When Iris left, she squeezed his arm. "I'll be here every Tuesday to check on anyone who needs it, and to make sure you're taking care of that knee." Marcus blinked. "How did you—" "I'm a nurse. I notice limps. Get it looked at." "I will." When Nola left with her foster mother, she threw her arms around Echo first, then surprised Marcus by hugging him too. "Thank you for letting Echo help me," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me understand what this place should be," Marcus replied. She pulled back and looked up at him with serious eyes. "Like Echo, always there when needed." "Like Echo," he agreed. One by one they left, until only Lillian remained. She stood in the foyer, her small suitcase at her feet, looking around the house as if memorizing it. "I don't want to go," she said. "Then stay," Marcus replied. "There's plenty of room." Lillian smiled. "I have a house of my own to take care of, but I'll be back, every week, to help with whatever needs doing." "I'd like that," Marcus said. She crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "You're going to do wonderful things here, Marcus Thorne. Your grandmother knew it. And now I know it too." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, then picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. Marcus watched her make her way carefully down the drive, her figure growing smaller against the white landscape. When she reached the bend in the road, she turned and waved. He waved back. Then she was gone, and Marcus was alone in the house for the first time in 4 days. The silence was profound. He moved through the rooms looking at the evidence of occupation, blankets still folded on couches, dishes drying by the sink, Nola's drawing taped to the refrigerator showing Echo with a halo, Sophie's preliminary sketches spread across the dining room table. The house felt different now, not empty despite the absence of people, full somehow of something that had not been there before: purpose, connection, hope. Echo followed him through his circuit, her nails clicking on the stone floors. When they reached the study, Marcus stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he closed the door, not locking it, not sealing it, simply closing it. The work recorded in those ledgers was important, sacred even, but it belonged to the past. His work would be different, and it would start today. Marcus made his way downstairs. In the kitchen, he made coffee. In the sitting room, he started a fire, even though the house was warm. In the main room, he stood at the window and looked down at Briar Glen, where lights were beginning to come on in the houses below. The town looked different to him now, Not distant and alien, but connected. Part of something he was beginning to understand he belonged to. His phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. Road cruise finished. Town meeting Thursday to discuss community center plans. Your presence requested. Marcus typed back a reply. I'll be there. Another text. This one from Sophie. Lumberyard offering discount on materials for reading room. Community project status. Can you meet tomorrow to review? Yes. What time? 10 a.m. I'll bring coffee. Marcus smiled. They were already moving forward. Already building. A third text. Iris. Clinic willing to partner for weekly health checks at community center. Volunteer basis. You interested? Very. Let's talk details Thursday. He set the phone down and returned to the window. Echo sat beside him, and together they watched darkness fall over the valley. The lights of the town multiplied. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued resilient and ordinary and precious. Marcus thought about the reading room they would build, about the gatherings that would happen here, about the people who would come when they needed shelter or community or simply a place to belong. He thought about his grandmother who had spent 40 years building this foundation, who had trusted him to continue the work, even though he had not trusted himself. He thought about the 3 men who had died in Iraq, about the weight he had carried for 6 years, believing that their deaths meant he had no right to live fully, no right to connect, no right to matter. But standing here in this house full of echoes and possibilities, Marcus understood something he had not been able to see before. Their deaths did not make his life less valuable. They made it more precious, because he was still here, still breathing, still capable of doing good in a world that desperately needed it. And that was not a burden. It was a gift. Marcus pressed his hand against the window, feeling the cold glass beneath his palm. Thank you, he said quietly, to his grandmother, to the men who had died, to Echo who had refused to let him give up, to all the people who had passed through this house in the last 4 days and had shown him what community could look like. Thank you. Echo's tail thumped against the floor. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus turned away from the window. There was work to do, plans to finalize, a reading room to build, a community to nurture. But tonight, he would rest. Tonight, he would simply be grateful for the house that had held them all, for the storm that had forced him to open the door, for the people who had trusted him enough to walk through it, and for the dog who had known long before he did that he was ready. Marcus walked through the house one final time, turning off lights, checking locks, making sure everything was secure. In each room, he paused, remembering, acknowledging. When he reached his bedroom, he stopped at the window. The moon was rising full and bright, casting silver light across the snow. It was beautiful, all of it. The broken world and the people trying to fix it. The weight and the wonder, the fear and the hope, all of it. Marcus climbed into bed and Echo settled on the floor beside him. Her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, when sleep came, it brought no nightmares. Only peace. Only the quiet certainty that he had found at last what he had been searching for all along. Not a house, not a mission, but a home. A place where broken things could be made whole, where the lost could be found, where the doors stayed open no matter how cold the wind or how dark the night, where love was measured not in words, but in warmth, in shelter, in the simple, profound act of staying. If this story touched you, if you see yourself in Marcus or Lillian or any of the people who found shelter on that hill, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us who taught you that it's okay to not be okay, who showed you that home is not a place, but the people who hold space for your pain. Subscribe to hear more stories about the weight we carry and the grace that carries us through. And remember, if you are struggling tonight, if you are carrying something too heavy to bear alone, reach out. Ask for help. Let someone hold the door open for you. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a door that stays open when you are too afraid to knock, as a dog who refuses to let you walk away, as strangers who become family simply by choosing to stay. May you find your door. May you have the courage to walk through it. And may you discover, as Marcus did, that the house you have been searching for has been waiting for you all along. The house that holds, the house that heals, the house that becomes home, not because of its walls, but because of the hearts that gather within them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And may God bless you and keep you wherever you are tonight.